My name is Lucian Var, or what's left of it. I was born in the underhives of Necromunda, where the air itself kills slower than the gangs. I remember the stench of oil and blood, the sound of screaming vents, and the dull hunger that lived behind every pair of eyes. Down there, life wasn't measured in years. It was measured in days survived. When the black ships came, the people of the hive called it salvation. The priests called it conscription. I called it a miracle, though I didn't know then what kind. They said I was chosen, marked for greatness. They saw in me something worth preserving. I was 12, too young to know that greatness in the Imperium is only another word for damnation. They took me from my home, blindfolded and bound, loaded into a shuttle that roared through the smog like a dying beast. I thought I was ascending to paradise, but paradise doesn't begin with pain. The tests began the moment we arrived. They lined us up, hundreds of boys stripped to bone and sinew, trembling beneath the eyes of warriors whose armor gleamed like death itself. The Adeptus Astartes. They spoke little. Their voices were thunder-contained in metal, their movements precise and mechanical. One of them, a giant whose armor bore the crimson seal of the Blood Ravens, paced before us. He stopped at each child, staring into their souls through his helmet's lenses. Some boys fainted under that gaze. Oh, some cried. One tried to run. The Marine didn't speak. He simply extended a hand and crushed the boy's skull like fruit. That was our first lesson. Mercy was weakness. Days blurred into weeks. We were starved, beaten, tested beyond endurance. Some were thrown into the pit with blades. Only one would climb out. Others were locked in isolation chambers where screams echoed for hours. I remember thinking that the Emperor must be watching, that perhaps he delighted in the sound. When they implanted the first organ, the secondary heart, I thought I would die. My body convulsed, blood foaming from my mouth. I prayed for death, but it never came. None of us knew how many organs they would add, how much of us would still remain human when it was over. The apothecaries called it ascension. We called it mutilation. I began to lose memories of who I had been. The underhive boy faded, piece by piece. The more they carved, the less I remembered. My mother's voice, my father's face, gone. All that remained was the hunger to survive. But survival wasn't enough. They demanded perfection. We were molded to be the Emperor's tools. Flesh turned into machine, faith turned into function. Sleep was rationed. Pain was constant. I once saw a boy refuse to recite the catechisms of hate during training. The chaplain burned his tongue out with a plasma torch, then made him kneel on molten iron until his knees fused. We learned that devotion was obedience. We learned that fear was the only path to purity. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I began to feel something I couldn't explain. A flicker of thought, a question that burned quietly like a forbidden flame. If we are made to protect mankind, why do we destroy so much of it? I buried that thought, as all initiates do, but I remember it still, because that question was the seed of my failure. When the time came to earn the armor, we were taken to the Hall of Echoes, a cavern vast enough to hold a cathedral lined with statues of heroes who had died for the chapter. At the center stood the Genseed Repository, a reliquary of flesh and machine humming with sacred energy. We were told that inside these vials lay the blood of gods, the genetic legacy of our Primarch. To be chosen was to carry divinity itself. The apothecaries moved like priests in a temple, chanting litanies as they injected the sacred material into our spines. The pain was beyond words. It wasn't the kind that tears flesh, it was the kind that invades the soul. I saw visions, fire wore 1,000 dying suns. I heard voices whispering names I couldn't pronounce, and when I awoke, I was no longer human. The others celebrated. I did not. Something inside me felt wrong. Not in my body, but in my mind. I could feel their thoughts when they prayed, their rage when they killed during training. It was as if I were tethered to them by threads of blood and memory. But where they felt devotion, I felt doubt. The chaplains told us that doubt was heresy, but doubt is the last proof of humanity Months later came our first trial by fire. A mission against a Xenos infestation on the mining world of Etherian 9. I remember the drop pods slamming into the ash plains, the air thick with smoke and radiation. The world stank of iron and decay. The sky burned orange, as if the sun itself wanted to flee. We advanced through the ruins, our bolters singing hymns of annihilation. I remember every recoil, every explosion of alien flesh. The others shouted praises to the Emperor, their voices triumphant and full of zeal. But I felt only silence. When the order came to purge the settlement, civilians hiding among the ruins, my body froze. They were miners, scarred and broken, clutching children. They begged. They called us angels. My brothers opened fire without hesitation. I remember a girl, no older than I was when they took me, staring up at me as my bolter hummed, waiting for me to pull the trigger. I couldn't. A hand shoved me aside. The captain's voice thundered through the Vox. Do your duty, Brother Var, or die with them. I didn't fire. When the smoke cleared, the civilians were gone. Nothing left but shadows on the wall. The captain's fist shattered my helm. He left me bleeding in the dirt as the squad moved on. I should have died that day. Perhaps I did. At least the part of me that still believed in salvation. After the battle, they stripped me of honor. No name in the records, no mark in the rolls of heroes. I was a Marine in form only, a hollow vessel, tolerated but never trusted. My captain said I lacked purity. The chaplain said I lacked faith. But I think I lacked something far simpler, the ability to kill without seeing a face. They told me to pray harder, to burn away my weakness with fire and devotion. I tried. Emperor knows I tried. But every night I saw that girl's eyes. Every night I wondered whether she'd been right to call us angels, or if we were demons wearing holy names. And though I didn't know it then, my failure on Etherian 9 was only the beginning. Because in the Imperium of man, there are fates far worse than death, and I was about to learn what it meant to live one. They called it penance. I called it punishment. After Etherian 9, A was reassigned to the 9th Company, a unit made for those the chapter deems salvageable but not trustworthy. We were the unwanted, the flawed, the nearly broken. Our chaplain said we were the unforged iron, metal that might yet serve if it survived the fire. The others called us the Ash Brethren. Our missions were the kind that ended in silence. Cleansing operations, suicide deployments, hopeless assaults, the kind of work that left no witnesses and no glory. If we succeeded, no one remembered us. If we failed, no one cared. We were not given banners or honors, only bolters, orders, and silence. Only bolters, orders, and silence. I thought I could redeem myself through obedience, that if I obeyed perfectly, if I killed without hesitation, the whispers in my mind would quiet. But faith isn't born of obedience, it's born of belief, and belief was something I had lost. Our next deployment was the moon of Carthage C, a cold, dead rock orbiting a decaying world. The Vox chatter said a tyrannid splinter fleet had infested the moon's mines. We were to cleanse it, purge it, and leave nothing but ash. I remember the descent. The thunder of drop pods splitting the atmosphere, the sound of armor locks sealing as we braced for impact. My heart didn't beat faster, it beat heavier, like a drum that knew it was counting down to something inevitable. The hatch blew open and the world screamed. The air was thick with spores, the ground was alive, pulsing veins of alien matter stretching across the rock. We advanced through tunnels where the walls seemed to breathe. The smell of acid burned our lungs even through filters. The first ambush came without warning. The Xenos burst from the walls like living blades. Claws, fangs, shrieks, a chaos of motion and blood. I moved on instinct, bolter roaring, every shot a prayer I no longer believed in. My brothers fought like gods, cold, efficient, merciless. I tried to match them. I wanted to prove I still belonged, but every scream, every dying echo reminded me of Etherian 9, Therian, adding game it. A lictor, cloaked, fast, silent as a nightmare. It dropped from the ceiling, impaling Brother Harkos through the chest. Harkos screamed once, then nothing. The creature tore him in two. I had a clean shot. I hesitated for the smallest fraction of a heartbeat because Hargos's eyes met mine. They were not afraid. They were accusing. The lictor turned on me. I fired late, a second too late. The beast struck, raking its claws across my helmet. Pain seared through my skull. I fell, half blind, half deaf, drowning in static and blood. The captain saved me. His blade tore the lictor apart in one motion, but his voice was colder than the void. You hesitate again, Var. You are not one of us. You never will be. He left me there, surrounded by the corpses of my brothers as the mission continued deeper into the tunnels. I lay in the dark for hours, maybe days. My armor's power core flickered, my Jean-Seed screaming warnings through neural pain. I prayed, though I no longer knew who I was praying to. The Emperor, my lost humanity, the silence. When I woke, the battle was over. The tunnels were quiet. My Vox was dead, only static. I dragged myself through the corridors, guided by the flicker of dying bioluminescence. Then I saw them, my brothers, or what was left of them. Their armor was torn open, their bodies fused with alien resin. Some were still alive, twitching, whispering prayers. I wanted to help them. I wanted to do something, but I couldn't. Their eyes followed me as I limped away. A dozen pairs of dying eyes burning with something that wasn't hate. It was pity. When I finally reached the surface, I saw the ships leaving orbit. They had left me behind. No extraction signal, no rescue. The realization hit harder than any blow I'd ever taken. The chapter had abandoned me. I was expendable. Worse than expendable. Worse than expendable? I was forgotten. For the first time, I understood what it truly meant to be a failed space marine. Not that you die, not that you lose, but that your own brothers stop seeing you as one of them. The silence of Carthage became my new companion. The wind carried no prayer, only the echoes of my own heartbeat. And somewhere deep inside, something began to break. Not loudly, not violently, but quietly, the way ice cracks beneath your feet just before it gives way. I thought death would come for me. I was wrong. Something far worse was waiting. Carthage was silent, too silent. The kind of silence that presses against your skull until it feels like your thoughts are echoing inside a tomb. I wandered for days, maybe weeks. The stars never moved. The light never changed. The moon was locked in a half-dead orbit, and I, a forgotten marine, was locked in a half-dead body. My armor's power cells were dying, my oxygen filters fading. The once sacred machine that had carried me through fire and blood now felt like a coffin that refused to close. I tried to send Vox signals to the chapter fleet. Static. Always static. I tried to pray. Silence. My wounds festered beneath the armor. My Jean-Seed tried to heal me, but it was faltering. The holy organs that had once made me a god among men were failing, one by one. I could feel them dying inside me, like stars burning out. When hunger set in, I remembered the apothecaries telling us we'd never feel it again, that the transplants made us immune to mortal cravings. They lied. I felt hunger, not the hunger of the body, but the hunger of purpose, the gnawing, endless ache of having nothing left to fight for. It was on the 10th day, or the 100th, I no longer knew, that I found them. Humans, civilians, survivors. They lived in the remains of a mining outpost half buried beneath ash and bone. There were fewer than 20 of them, gaunt, starving eyes like glass. When they saw me, they didn't run. They dropped to their knees. They called me Angel. For a moment, I almost believed them. They brought me food, or what passed for it, and water filtered from the condensation units. I towered over them, an armored god among wretches. But I had no sermons to give, no blessings to bestow. All I had was a weapon and the shame of surviving where better men had died. The leader was a woman named Mara. Her voice was cracked, but calm. The kind of calm that comes only after losing everything. She told me they had been trapped since the invasion, that the Xenos were gone, but the Imperium had never returned. The sky was poisoned, the ground cursed, and hope was a word that had no meaning anymore. I asked her why they hadn't given up. She said, because the Emperor still watches. I wanted to tell her the truth, that the Emperor had stopped watching a long time ago, but I couldn't. Not yet. Days passed. I helped them rebuild the perimeter. I hunted the last remnants of Tyrannid scavengers that roamed the wastes. I repaired the filtration units with the knowledge I'd once used to maintain bolters. For the first time in years, my hands built something that wasn't meant to destroy. But every night I dreamt of the past, of battlefields painted red and gold, of sermons that promised eternity through obedience. I saw my brothers' faces, pale and still beneath alien resin. I heard the captain's voice echo in my skull. You were not one of us, you never will be. I woke screaming into the darkness of my helmet. Mara never asked who I was beneath the armor. Maybe she knew better than to ask. Maybe she saw that some truths are too heavy for words. It was in the 3rd week that the inquisitorial ship arrived. I saw it before anyone else. A black shape blotting out the stars, its engines whispering judgment. No transponder signal, no declaration. Just presence. I knew what it meant. The Imperium had found us. Mara thought it was salvation. The others cheered, weeping openly, but I felt only dread. I told them to hide. They didn't understand why. I didn't have time to explain. The drop pods came down like falling stars, trailing smoke and light. They landed with the sound of thunder, and when the hatches opened, I saw them. Men in black armor, bearing the sigil of the Inquisition. Their leader's voice came through the Vox, cold, mechanical, absolute. By decree of the Ordo Hereticus, this world is under quarantine. No life is permitted to remain. The crowd froze. I stepped forward. They recognized my armor, scarred though it was. Their weapons lowered for a moment. Then the interrogator saw the damage to my chest plate, the lack of heraldry, the worn-out sigils. His tone changed. A name and chapter. Alucian Var, I said. Oh, Blood Ravens, 9th Company. He checked his data slate. I no record of that designation. You are a heretic. A deserter. Hurrah. I tried to explain the mission, the abandonment, the survivors. He didn't care. The Inquisition doesn't listen. It judges. When the first shot rang out, it wasn't at me. It was at Mara. Something inside me broke. Not like glass, but like a dam. The next few minutes are a blur of rage and motion. Polza. I don't remember drawing my blade. I don't remember the first kill. Only the aftermath, the silence that follows slaughter. The inquisitorial squad lay in pieces at my feet. The civilians, most were dead. Mara was among them, her eyes still open, her hand reaching toward me as if she still believed I could save her. I fell to my knees beside her, my armor slick with the blood of both ally and foe. For the first time in my life, I cried, not the tears of weakness, but of realization. I had become the very thing I had sworn to fight, a monster wearing the armor of a god. The sky cracked open above me, orbital bombardment beginning its descent. Fire rained down. The Imperium does not forgive. It does not question. It only burns. I ran into the wastes, the ground shaking beneath my feet. My armor screamed warnings. My heart ached with pain, both physical and eternal. Anyway, when the bombardment ended, the outpost was gone. The civilians, the ruins, all reduced to molten glass. Only I remained, the lost one. A failed space marine who had defied his brothers, defied his gods, and now defied the very empire that had made him. As I walked into the endless night of Carthus the Year, I made a vow. Not to the Emperor, not to chaos, but to myself. I will not serve gods who demand innocence as tribute. And so began the long road into exile. The road that would take me beyond redemption, beyond reason, and into the heart of heresy itself. The bombardment ended, but the silence after was worse than any thunder. The world had been purged, sterilized by holy fire. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, nothing breathed. I was alone again, but this time solitude was different. Before it was despair. Now it was defiance. The armor that once marked me as divine now felt like a curse. The blood of both Imperium and Inquisition still clung to it. I tried to scrape it off, but it wouldn't leave. The red had sunk too deep. It had become part of me. The months that followed blurred into survival. I scavenged what I could from the ashes. Rations, ammunition, scraps of armor torn from fallen enemies. My gencive continued to decay, and I felt the weakness spreading through my limbs. I was dying. Slowly, piece by piece, but death had no claim on me yet. I thought I had escaped notice. I was wrong. The first time they came, it wasn't the Imperium. It was something far worse. A ship descended from orbit, not black and cold like the Inquisition's, but alive with color and corruption. Its hull bore symbols that twisted the air around them. Chaos. They had heard the story, a lone Marine who had killed the Inquisition's hunters and defied the Emperor's command. To them, that wasn't sin, that was invitation. They sent an emissary to the surface, a Chaos Space Marine clad in crimson armor so deep it seemed to bleed. His voice was soft, almost kind. "A brother," he said, "you have already turned your back on the false god. Why do you still cling to his chains?" I said nothing. He walked around me, studying me as though I were prey that hadn't yet realized it was cornered. You fight without faith, and yet you live. You kill without cause, and yet you suffer. There is a place for you among us. The warbands would kneel to a warrior who has slain the servants of the corpse emperor. He offered me his hand, blackened by corruption, veins pulsing with warp light. For a moment, I almost took it, because the truth is, part of me wanted to. Not for power, not for vengeance, but for belonging, for the illusion that someone, anyone, would understand what I had become. But I didn't take it. Instead, I said, "I have seen gods. They all bleed." And then I tore his arm from his body. The rest of his warband came after me, but I fought like a man who had already died. The earth burned, the air screamed, and when it was over, the corrupted Marine lay headless, his ichor soaking into the ash. Their ship left the moon in silence. Even chaos had no interest in a man who refused every master. Weeks turned to months. The loneliness became a living thing, whispering in the static of my broken vox, haunting the edge of sleep. I began talking to myself, sometimes out loud, sometimes just inside my mind. Lucian Var, I would whisper. A brother? Traitor. Monster. Names lost, all meaning. All that remained was memory, and memory is the cruelest weapon of all. Sometimes I thought I saw them, my brothers, the blood ravens, standing in the distance, their armor shining in the darkness. But when I drew closer, they vanished, leaving only the wind. I began to wonder whether I was truly alive, or if this was what damnation looked like, wandering forever in a world that refused to die. It wasn't long before the Imperium came again. Not with fire this time, but with chains. A retrieval ship landed in the wasteland, not to rescue, but to collect. The Inquisition wanted proof of their purge. They didn't expect me to be among the ruins. I let them capture me. They shackled me in null bindings, dragged me aboard, and locked me in a cold cell lined with purity seals. They didn't speak to me at first. They just watched, as though observing a specimen that had survived conditions impossible for life. On the 5th day, the interrogator arrived. He wore no armor, only robes marked with the sigils of the Ordo Hereticus. His face was young, but his eyes were ancient. "Lucian Var," he said. A once of the blood ravens, charged with heresy, insubordination, and apostasy. "Do you deny these charges?" I didn't answer. He smiled, thin, joyless. "Of course not." They all begin with silence. He asked me why I had killed his inquisitorial brothers. I told him they killed first. He asked me why I had spared civilians. I told him they were human. He asked me why I had turned my back on the Emperor. That was the only question I answered with honesty, because the Emperor turned his back on me first. The interrogations became torture. They didn't want truth. They wanted confession, the kind that fit into their scriptures. They wanted me to cry for forgiveness, to beg for the Emperor's mercy. But mercy is a language the Imperium has forgotten. I endured their machines, their blades, their fire. I endured until endurance itself lost meaning. One night, as the cell lights flickered, the interrogator leaned close and whispered, "You could still serve Lucien Var, not as a Marine, not as a Marine, not as a man, but as a weapon, a mind wiped clean, a body reforged. The Emperor demands only function, not faith." I spat blood and laughed. "Then your Emperor will have to build better men than me." That was the last thing I said before I broke the chains. They underestimated me. Even weakened, half dead, I was still what the Emperor had made. A weapon that refused to die. I killed the guards, tore open the ship's hull, and escaped into the void in a stolen pod. I don't know how long I drifted, days, maybe years. The stars blurred into one endless dream of black and fire. Eventually, a derelict freighter picked up my pod. Its crew were smugglers, heretics, deserters, the forgotten detritus of the Imperium. When they saw my armor, they knelt in fear. I told them not to. I was no god, no hero, just an outcast clinging to a lie that had finally burned itself out. For the first time, I spoke my truth aloud. I am not the Emperor's son. I am not the Primarch's echo. I am what remains when faith is stripped away and duty is all that's left. The smuggler captain looked at me, old, scarred, wiser than most priests. He said, "Then maybe you're the closest thing to honest the Imperium's ever made." His words stayed with me. Maybe honesty was heresy. Maybe truth itself was rebellion. Either way, I was already damned. As the ship drifted toward the edge of the system, I stared at the stars and realized something terrifying. I didn't want redemption anymore. I wanted understanding. And to find that, I would have to descend even deeper into darkness. The smuggler ship that found me was a coffin with engines. Its hull groaned, its lights flickered, and its crew spoke in whispers as if the void might be listening. They called it the Wraithbound, a fitting name for a vessel crewed by ghosts who refused to die. They were outlaws of the Imperium, men and women whose crimes ranged from desertion to forbidden knowledge. They lived in the spaces between empires, scavenging the bones of dead worlds and the wreckage of forgotten wars. To them, I was something out of nightmare and myth. A broken space marine, a relic of the Emperor's cruelty. But they didn't fear me for long. Fear fades when survival is the only religion left. The captain's name was Vera. She was old, sharp, and colder than the stars outside. A former commissar stripped of rank and left to rot after refusing to execute her own regiment. Her eyes burned with the same quiet fury I saw in the mirror. She didn't ask who I was. She just said, "If you can pull a trigger and keep your mouth shut, you're crew." And so I became something new. Not a Marine, not a soldier, not even a man. Just a shadow working among thieves and liars. We drifted through systems the Imperium had forgotten, raiding derelicts, trading stolen relics, and smuggling survivors from purges. I should have felt guilt for working with criminals. But after what I had seen, I realized there were no innocent men left in this galaxy. Only those who hadn't yet been caught in its gears. For the first time since my exile, I began to feel something like purpose again. Not duty, not faith, but a kind of grim mercy. Every life we saved, every child smuggled out of a burning city, felt like a quiet defiance against the madness of the Imperium. But peace, even the fragile kind, never lasts long in the 41st millennium. It happened during a raid on an old Imperial listening post orbiting a dead world. We were looking for salvage, data cores, Zonseed vials, anything that could buy us a few more cycles of fuel. But what we found wasn't treasure, it was a ghost. Inside the derelict station preserved in stasis was another Astartes. His armor bore the sigil of the word Bearers, a Chaos Legion. His face was half hidden beneath scar tissue, his mouth stitched with scripture. When he awoke, the first thing he said was my name. Aleutian Var, the Lost One. I raised my bolter instantly, but he didn't move. He just smiled, the kind of smile that comes from knowing something you shouldn't. "You think you are free," he said. "But there is no freedom outside of faith. You serve something. Even now, you serve your guilt." I told him I serve no one. "What?" "Lies," he whispered. You serve the memory of a god who abandoned you. You serve mercy in a universe that has none. You are the Emperor's greatest failure, the proof that even angels can feel pity. I should have killed him then, but I didn't, because somewhere deep inside I knew he was right. Over the next few days, he spoke to me through the cell walls, soft, measured words like prayers that had been turned inside out. He told me stories of the warp, of the gods beyond the veil, of how every emotion, every flicker of rage or compassion feeds something greater. The Emperor's lie, he said, is that there is only order and chaos, but there is only hunger and choice. At first I ignored him, but his words began to haunt me, because I had seen the hunger myself. In the Imperium, in chaos, in every living soul. Maybe he was right. Maybe the universe itself was nothing more than a devouring machine. On the 6th night, I went to his cell. He was kneeling in the corner, whispering to no one. You could be a god, he said. Not a servant, not a slave. A god of your own making. All it takes is surrender. I stared at him for a long time. Then I said, I have seen gods. They demand too much and give too little. And I walked away. But he had planted a seed, a question that grew like infection. If both sides were lies, what was left to believe in? That question followed me into sleep, into waking, into every silent hour between stars. I began to dream of a battlefield where both banners burned, and in the center stood a man. Neither angel nor demon holding a broken sword. Was that me? Or was that what I was meant to become? The word bearer died days later. He tore open his stasis injector with his teeth and let the warp claim him. His body turned to ash, but his laughter remained in the ship's corridors for hours after. Vera found me standing at the viewport, staring into the void. Don't tell me you're starting to believe his sermons, she said. I didn't answer right away. I just watched the stars drift like cold embers. I hid. The leaf, I said quietly, is a weapon. The problem is, everyone keeps turning it on themselves. She smirked. Then maybe it's time someone pointed it somewhere else. Her words struck something deep in me, a realization. Maybe I didn't need to serve the Emperor. Maybe I didn't need to fall to chaos. Maybe there was a third path, one no one had ever dared to walk. That night, I made my choice. Not redemption, not corruption, rebellion. Against gods, against monsters, against everything that demanded obedience. If the Imperium was order without mercy, and chaos was freedom without restraint, then I would be neither. I would be the one thing both sides feared, a free man. I reforged my armor, stripped away every symbol, every sigil, every trace of allegiance. I painted it black, the color of memory and mourning. When Vera asked what I would call myself now, I said, a nothing. A name is a leash. But deep down, I knew what I had become. A heretic not by worship, but by will. From that day forward, every system we entered, every colony we freed, every Imperial patrol we destroyed carried a whisper. The Black Marine walks among the stars, the one who fights for no god and answers to no master. The Imperium called me traitor. Chaos called me coward. But the Forgotten called me hope. And yet, hope is the most dangerous heresy of all, because it never dies quietly. And mine was about to be tested one final time. It began with a signal, a distress call, weak and broken, carried on the dying frequencies of an old Imperial beacon. The message was simple. Refugees under attack, any loyal craft respond. Vera wanted to ignore it. It's bait, she said. The Imperium sets these traps all the time. Dangle civilians in front of you, then strike when you show mercy. But mercy was my last addiction. I told her if it's a trap, we'll spring it. Better that than letting them die screaming. The Wraithbound dropped out of warp above a dying world. Black clouds, burning oceans, cities split open like corpses. The attack had already begun. Not Imperial, not chaos. Something worse. Orcs. Thousands of them. Their warships circled the planet like vultures, spitting fire into the atmosphere. The ground burned green with their madness. The Imperium had abandoned the colony weeks ago, but there were still tens of thousands trapped below. Miners, workers, families. And now, there were only two options, run or fight. I chose the second. Vera looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You want to take on an entire warband of orcs with a crew of smugglers and a half-dead marine? I said no. I want to make them regret landing. That night we planned the impossible. The Wraithbound couldn't win an open battle, but it could bleed the enemy. We targeted their supply lines, their fuel convoys, their landing craft. Every strike we made was surgical, brutal, and fast. The orcs didn't understand precision, they understood rage, and soon they turned on each other. By the end of the first week, their fleet was chaos. Burning ships colliding, war bosses fighting for control. That was when I landed on the surface. The planet's air was poison. The ground was molten glass. Every step I took, my boots hissed and steamed. I moved through the ruins like a ghost, cutting through mobs of orcs with silent fury. Boulder shells roared, chain swords shrieked, and still they came. But I wasn't fighting for victory. I was fighting for distraction. Every orc focused on me was one less tearing into the civilians trying to flee. For days the battle raged. I lost count of the bodies, lost track of time. The only measure left was pain. Then came the war boss, a mountain of muscle and iron, wielding a blade the size of a man. His laughter shook the ground. You da tiny humie in da red armor? Da one who kills da boys. I didn't answer. He charged, roaring like a thunderstorm. I met him head on. His blade shattered my shoulder plate. My sword tore through his gut. He didn't die easy. None of them ever do. When it was over, the battlefield was silent except for the hiss of cooling blood. I knelt beside the corpse and whispered, "This is what your gods make of war." Hours later, the refugees made it aboard the Wraithbound. 1,000 lives, maybe less, saved from the billions who had already burned. But the victory was short-lived. As we rose from orbit, new ships appeared on the scanners. Imperial frigates bearing the sigil of the Inquisition. Vera cursed under her breath. They must have traced the distress beacon. They'll call us heretics for helping. I watched the fleet approach. Dozens of ships forming a blockade between us and freedom. Part of me almost laughed. After everything, chaos, exile, betrayal, it was the Imperium itself that came to finish what had started. Their Vox transmission came through, cold and formal. Unidentified vessel Wraithbound, you are harboring fugitives and a known traitor Astartes. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded in the name of the Emperor. Vera turned to me. What do we do? I looked out at the fleet. The same emblem I once fought beneath now aimed at me. We don't surrender, I said. Not to gods, not to men, not to anyone, not to anyone. The battle that followed would never make the archives. The Imperium doesn't record its embarrassments. But somewhere in the data ghosts of forgotten systems, the record still exists of a single outlaw ship tearing through an entire inquisitorial strike force. We hit their engines, their reactors, their comms relays. Precise, surgical, merciless. I led boarding teams, slaughtering stormtroopers who called me a brother as they died. Every time I heard that word, it cut deeper than any blade. A brother. Once it meant unity. Witty. Now it was just a memory of chains. Hours stretched into days. The Wraithbound bled, its hull screaming under the strain. Fires tore through its corridors. Vera was wounded, half her crew dead or dying. And still we fought. But war is a tide. You can delay it. You can bleed it. You can bleed it. You can never stop it. The last of the Imperial cruisers rammed us head-on. The impact threw me across the bridge. When I rose, everything was burning. Air thick with smoke, alarms shrieking, stars flickering through shattered glass. Vera was slumped over the command chair. She looked up at me, blood running from her mouth. Was it worth it? She asked. I didn't answer, because I didn't know. I carried her to the escape pods. Only one still worked. She looked at me with the same fierce eyes she had on the day we met. You could still leave, Marine. There's a place out there for men like you. I shook my head. No, there isn't. She smiled faintly. Then make one. And then she was gone, ejected into the void, vanishing among the stars. The ship was dying. The Imperium was closing in. I could have escaped. But instead, I walked back to the heart of the bridge and sent one final message, not to the Inquisition, not to chaos, not to any fleet, to the people. This is Lucien Var, once a space marine, now nothing. You were told there is no life beyond obedience, no mercy outside the Emperor's light. That is a lie. Not a saint, not a demon, just a man who learned that freedom, like faith, demands sacrifice. And that is how legends are born, not from glory, not from victory, but from those who dared to stand alone and were never meant to survive. So when someone asks you about the heretic who defied the Emperor, the man who fought for no God and still saved thousands, tell them this: he wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain. He was what comes after both. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but even war can remember mercy. There are stars that no longer exist, their light still reaching us centuries after they've died. The galaxy is full of them, ghosts pretending to be suns. Lucien Var was one of those stars. Burned out long ago, but his light refused to fade. In the archives of the Inquisition, deep beneath Terra's iron soil, there exists a sealed file. Classification: Omega Null. Access: prohibited. Subject: Lucien Var. The file begins with a single sentence, unsigned and untraceable. He did not fall to chaos. He rose beyond it. Every time an Inquisitor reads that line, they delete it. But somehow it always returns, like a scar that refuses to heal. Some whisper that even the Emperor himself knows that name. Not as a curse, but as a reminder of what he created and what he lost. On the far edges of the galaxy, where Imperial light falters and the warp whispers between stars, pilgrims still tell stories. They say that when the void is silent and your ship's lights flicker, a shadow passes by the viewport. Black armor gleaming faintly, helm cracked, eyes burning gold. If you see him, you are blessed, because it means your world will live, and someone will die to make sure of it. They call him the last angel. The Imperium calls it heresy, but those who survive call it salvation. Somewhere in the endless dark, a ship drifts without name. Its engines hum softly, powered by relics older than memory. Inside, a single figure stands before a viewport, his armor worn, his hands scarred, his breath shallow. He does not speak. He only listens to the sound of the universe breathing. After a long silence, he says quietly, "I am still here." And for a moment it feels as if the stars themselves pause to listen. There was never meant to be a happy ending. Not for a man like Lucien Var. But perhaps there was meant to be meaning. Because in a galaxy where gods demand obedience, the greatest rebellion is to remain human. To choose mercy when everyone else chooses power. To forgive even when forgiveness is forbidden. That was his final gift to the universe. Not salvation, not revolution, but proof. Proof that even in the coldest void, something of us survives. They say the last words he ever recorded were found in a fragment of corrupted Vox data, recovered centuries later from a derelict drifting beyond the halo stars. The message is barely audible, static, distortion, a voice half swallowed by time. But if you listen closely, you can still hear it. If you hear this, remember me not as a warrior, not as a hero. Remember me as a man who learned too late that mercy is not weakness. And if the Emperor still watches, tell him I kept fighting, then silence, then darkness. And yet even now, some claim that when war breaks out on forgotten worlds, when chaos claws at the edge of reality,